The slap echoed through the federal courthouse lobby in downtown Chicago. Conversations stopped. Security officers froze. Visitors turned their heads in disbelief. For a brief moment, the entire building seemed to hold its breath. Sarah Washington stood motionless beside the security checkpoint. Her visitor badge lay scattered across the polished marble floor. The sting on her cheek was sharp, but the humiliation cut much deeper. She slowly lifted a hand to the side of her face while staring directly at the officer who had struck her. Officer Marcus Cain looked completely unbothered. 20 years of authority had taught him that some people mattered and others did not. In his mind, Sarah belonged in the second category. "Keep your fake papers and get out," he said. The surrounding crowd exchanged nervous glances. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody challenged him. Years of watching power operate unchecked had taught most people to remain silent. Sarah knelt calmly and gathered her documents. Her navy suit remained immaculate despite the scene. Every movement was controlled. Every breath was measured. She picked up her visitor pass and examined it briefly. Then she looked toward Cain's nameplate. "Officer Marcus Cain," she said quietly. Cain smirked. "That's right. Now leave before I escort you out." Sarah nodded once. "I won't forget your name." Outside, cold March wind swept through the streets of Chicago. Gray clouds hung over the city skyline. Traffic moved slowly beneath the looming federal buildings. Sarah stepped onto the sidewalk and paused. Many people would have cried. Many would have screamed. Some might have walked away forever. Sarah Washington did none of those things. Instead, she sat inside her black sedan and opened a leather notebook. She carefully recorded the exact time, the location, the witnesses, the words Cain had spoken. Every detail mattered. Her phone vibrated. "How did it go?" asked Maya, her 17-year-old daughter. Sarah looked through the windshield at the courthouse entrance. "Exactly as I expected," she replied. "Mum, are you okay?" A long silence followed. "I will be." She ended the call and stared at the building. Most people who encountered Marcus Cain never challenged him. They simply wanted to move on with their lives. That was how men like him survived. Not because they were powerful, but because everyone else was exhausted. Sarah was different. For more than 20 years, she had built a career studying systems, leadership, accountability, and institutional culture. She understood something Cain did not. One incident could expose an entire structure. The next morning, she filed a civil rights complaint. Within days, security footage requests were submitted. Witness statements were collected. Medical records documented the bruising on her face. News of the incident quietly spread across legal circles. Then something unexpected happened. 3 courthouse employees contacted Sarah privately. Each told a similar story. Different victims, different years. The same officer. The same pattern. The same assumptions. As the evidence accumulated, Sarah realized her experience was not an isolated event. It was merely the latest chapter in a much longer history. Weeks later, the federal courtroom filled with spectators as Washington versus Cain officially began. Reporters occupied the back rows. Community leaders sat quietly near the entrance. Marcus Cain arrived wearing his uniform and his usual confidence. He believed the system would protect him. After all, it always had. Across the room, Sarah sat alone at the plaintiff's table. Her expression revealed nothing. A neatly organized briefcase rested beside her chair. Inside were hundreds of pages of evidence, but hidden beneath those files was something far more significant. Something that would transform this case from a simple lawsuit into a moment that would shake an entire police department. As the judge called the courtroom to order, Sarah glanced briefly at her watch. Then she smiled. The smile lasted only a second. Nobody noticed it. Nobody except Marcus Cain. And for the first time since this began, a small feeling of unease settled into his chest. Marcus Cain settled comfortably into the witness chair. The courtroom lights reflected off his polished badge. He looked confident, composed, and completely certain of the outcome. For 2 decades, the system had rewarded his version of events. Today would be no different. His attorney, Richard Peterson, adjusted his glasses and approached the jury. "Officer Cain, please describe what occurred on March 15th. Cain nodded solemnly. I was performing routine courthouse security duties when an aggressive individual approached my checkpoint. Sarah sat silently at the plaintiff's table. Her pen moved steadily across a yellow legal pad. She never interrupted. She never reacted. The calmness irritated Cain more than he cared to admit. The individual became confrontational immediately, Cain continued. She refused standard procedures and acted in a threatening manner. Peterson looked toward the jury. Did you feel endangered? Absolutely. I believed courthouse personnel were at risk. Several jurors exchanged uncertain glances. Cain noticed and pushed harder. I acted according to my training. My responsibility is protecting federal employees and visitors. The words sounded convincing. Years of experience had taught him exactly how to present himself. Professional, measured, reasonable, Peterson displayed edited security footage. The video began after the initial confrontation. It showed only fragments, Sarah appearing to move, Cain stepping forward, the context missing. The beginning erased. Peterson pointed toward the screen. This footage supports Officer Cain's testimony. Cain relaxed slightly. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Then Sarah stood. Objection. The courtroom turned toward her. Her voice remained calm. The video lacks foundational context and presents only a partial sequence of events. Peterson frowned. The footage is relevant. Relevant, Sarah replied, but incomplete. The judge considered both arguments. The jury may view the footage. Weight and credibility will be determined during deliberation. Sarah nodded and returned to her seat. No frustration, no visible concern. Again, that composure unsettled Cain. Throughout the morning, Peterson presented character witnesses. 2 fellow officers praised Cain's professionalism. A retired supervisor described him as dedicated. Another called him a model employee. The testimony painted a picture of reliability and public service. Cain could almost feel victory approaching. During lunch recess, reporters gathered outside the courtroom. Many expected a routine civil rights dispute. Some predicted a settlement. Few anticipated anything extraordinary. Inside the courthouse cafeteria, Sarah sat alone reviewing documents. A young law student approached cautiously. Ms. Washington? Sarah looked up. Yes? I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For fighting. Most people don't. Sarah smiled gently. Sometimes the cost of silence becomes greater than the cost of speaking. The student nodded and walked away. Back in the courtroom, proceedings resumed. Peterson completed his examination. Cain stepped down from the stand feeling satisfied. He glanced toward Sarah. She was organizing files with remarkable precision. Every folder carried color-coded tabs. Every document appeared carefully labeled. Nothing seemed random. Nothing seemed improvised. The attention to detail bothered him. He could not explain why. Then Sarah rose to testify. The atmosphere shifted instantly. She walked to the witness stand with quiet confidence, not arrogance, not performance. Authority. The kind earned over years rather than demanded in a moment. After taking the oath, she folded her hands calmly. Please state your name, the judge instructed. Sarah Elizabeth Washington. Tell us what happened that morning. Sarah described the encounter carefully. Every sentence was concise, every detail precise. She quoted Cain's words exactly. She described the slap. She explained her actions afterward. No exaggeration, no dramatics, only facts. When Peterson began cross-examination, he expected an easy target. Instead, he encountered something entirely different. Ms. Washington, do you possess any formal legal training? A faint smile appeared. Yes. Peterson blinked. You do? I do. Could you elaborate? At the appropriate time. A ripple of curiosity spread through the courtroom. Peterson changed direction. How familiar are you with police procedures? Extremely familiar. In what capacity? Sarah checked her watch. The movement seemed insignificant, yet she appeared to be monitoring something carefully. That answer will also become relevant very soon. Peterson frowned. Jurors leaned forward. Even the judge looked intrigued. Cain shifted uneasily. For the first time since the lawsuit began, he felt genuinely uncertain. Sarah's confidence was not the confidence of a victim hoping to win. It was the confidence of someone who already knew something nobody else knew. As court recessed briefly before afternoon proceedings, Sarah received a text message. She glanced at the screen. Then she smiled. The same mysterious smile Cain had noticed earlier. This time it lasted slightly longer. And suddenly he realized something that made his stomach tighten. Sarah Washington was not reacting to events. She was waiting for them. The afternoon session began beneath heavy clouds gathering over Chicago. Rain tapped softly against the courthouse windows. Inside, the atmosphere felt increasingly tense. Marcus Cain could not explain the feeling growing in his chest. The evidence presented so far should have reassured him. His attorney remained confident. The edited footage had helped. His colleagues had supported him. Yet Sarah Washington sat at the plaintiff's table with a calmness that felt unnatural. She looked less like someone fighting a battle and more like someone waiting for a clock to reach a predetermined moment. At precisely 1:15 p.m., proceedings resumed. Attorney Peterson stood. "Your Honor, the defense would like to establish the plaintiff's motivations." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Peterson approached Sarah. "Ms. Washington, what exactly do you hope to gain from this lawsuit?" Sarah folded her hands. "Accountability. Financial compensation? No. Public recognition? No. Then why pursue this case?" Sarah paused briefly. "Because power without accountability eventually becomes abuse." Several jurors wrote notes. Peterson pressed forward. "You expect this jury to believe your intentions are entirely selfless." "I expect the jury to examine evidence. Intentions are secondary." A few spectators smiled. Peterson clearly disliked the answer. "You seem unusually familiar with legal procedures." "I am." "And police policies?" "Very." "How familiar?" Sarah checked her watch. 1:22 p.m. "Extensively." "Can you be more specific?" Again, that small smile appeared. "Soon." The courtroom stirred. Even the judge looked mildly amused. Peterson frowned. He felt as though he were questioning someone who already knew the final chapter of a story while everyone else remained trapped in the middle. Meanwhile, Sarah's thoughts remained focused elsewhere. Not on Peterson, not on Cain, not even on the lawsuit itself. Her mind kept returning to years spent studying leadership failures. The greatest danger was never one bad officer. It was a culture that convinced people bad behavior would never face consequences. Marcus Cain had become dangerous because too many people had looked away. That pattern ended today. At 1:30 p.m., Sarah's legal team quietly entered, carrying several large evidence boxes. Cain noticed immediately. His confidence weakened. Those boxes had not been present that morning. Peterson noticed as well. "Your Honor, what are those materials?" Attorney Benjamin Williams rose. "Supplemental evidence acquired through completed public records requests." Peterson objected instantly. "This is highly irregular." "The evidence was obtained legally," Williams replied. The judge reviewed the filings. "The court will allow presentation after foundation is established." Cain's heartbeat accelerated. He had never liked surprises, especially legal surprises. Williams approached the courtroom display screen. "Ladies and gentlemen, he began. "We would like to introduce courthouse surveillance footage from 4 independent camera systems." The room became silent. Cain felt blood drain from his face. Independent cameras. Not body cameras. Not edited footage. Independent cameras. For the first time all day, genuine fear entered his mind. The video appeared on the screen. Timestamp 9:14 a.m. 1 minute before Sarah arrived. The footage showed Cain laughing with another officer. Relaxed, comfortable, no visible concern, no security threat, no emergency. Then Sarah entered the frame, professional, composed. Visitor badge already visible. The jury watched closely. Every eye remained fixed on the screen. Williams pressed play. Audio filled the courtroom. "Wrong building, sweetheart. The food stamps office is down the street." Several jurors visibly reacted. Cain closed his eyes. The nightmare had begun. Sarah remained perfectly still. The footage continued. "What business? Baby daddy locked up again?" Gasps spread through the gallery. Peterson's shoulders slumped. He knew immediately. The case had changed. The jury watched Sarah calmly attempt to present identification. They watched Cain escalate the confrontation. Then came the moment. The slap, clear, unprovoked, impossible to explain away, impossible to edit, impossible to deny. The sound echoed through the courtroom speakers. Nobody spoke afterward. Nobody needed to. The truth required no commentary. Williams stopped the video. The silence lasted several seconds. Then he addressed the jury. Officer Cain testified under oath that Ms. Washington advanced aggressively. He pointed toward the frozen image. Sarah stood with her hands at her sides, motionless. The evidence suggests otherwise. Across the room, Marcus Cain stared at the screen. For 20 years, he had relied on assumptions, on silence, on protection, on people choosing convenience over truth. Today, those protections were disappearing, one by one. Then Williams opened the first evidence box. Inside sat 15 personnel complaints, each bearing the same name, Marcus Cain. And suddenly he realized the surveillance footage was not the worst thing waiting for him. It was only the beginning. A cold silence settled over the courtroom. The surveillance footage remained frozen on the large screen. Marcus Cain stared at the image of himself striking Sarah Washington. For years, he had survived complaints through technicalities, missing evidence, and institutional protection. This time, there was nowhere to hide. Attorney Benjamin Williams opened the first evidence box. Inside were personnel records collected from multiple agencies through public records requests. The stack was thick, far thicker than anyone expected. Williams approached the witness stand. "Officer Cain, do you recognize these documents?" Cain swallowed. "They appear to be personnel records." "Your personnel records." The courtroom remained completely silent. Williams lifted the first complaint. March 2018. A black attorney reported discriminatory treatment at courthouse security. Do you remember this incident? Not specifically. June 2019. A Hispanic federal contractor filed a complaint regarding targeted screening. I don't recall. September 2020. A university professor alleged racial profiling. I don't remember. The pattern continued, one complaint after another, 1 year after another, different people, different professions, the same officer, the same behavior, the same outcome. No meaningful discipline, no accountability. Several jurors began taking rapid notes. Cain's attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable. The problem was no longer the assault itself. The problem was the pattern. Patterns were difficult to explain away. Williams displayed a chart on the courtroom screen. Colored bars illustrated years of complaints. The visual impact was devastating: 15 formal allegations, 4 internal warnings, 0 serious consequences. Sarah watched quietly from her table. This was the part many people never understood. Systems rarely failed because warning signs were absent. They failed because warning signs were ignored. Williams called the next witness, Janet Morrison, a courthouse clerk with 16 years of service. She took the oath and settled into the witness chair. Ms. Morrison, have you observed Officer Cain interacting with courthouse visitors? Thousands of times. Did you witness the incident involving Ms. Washington? Yes. What did you see? Morrison looked directly toward the jury. I saw Officer Cain insult her before she even spoke. Cain lowered his eyes. Did Ms. Washington appear threatening? Not even slightly. Did she behave aggressively? No. Did Officer Cain strike her? Yes. The answer landed heavily, short, simple, devastating. Williams continued, Have you witnessed similar behavior before? Peterson objected. The judge overruled. Answer the question. Morrison nodded. Many times. A murmur spread through the gallery. Can you elaborate? Officer Cain treated some people differently, especially minorities. Many employees noticed it. Did anyone report concerns? Repeatedly. What happened afterward? Morrison hesitated. Nothing. Those 7 letters felt heavier than pages of testimony. Nothing. Years of complaints, years of warnings, years of opportunities. Nothing. Williams introduced additional witnesses: a retired federal employee, a former courthouse contractor, a legal assistant. Each described remarkably similar experiences, different dates, different circumstances, the same assumptions, the same disrespect, the same officer. By early afternoon, Marcus Cain looked exhausted. The confidence he displayed that morning had vanished. His shoulders sagged, his answers grew shorter, his certainty disappeared. Yet Sarah remained composed. She continued checking her watch periodically. 12:45, 1:05, 1:20, 1:35. Every glance seemed deliberate, as though another event remained ahead, something bigger than the lawsuit itself. The judge finally called a short recess. People flooded the hallways, reporters rushed to file updates, television crews adjusted cameras, social media exploded with discussion. Inside a private conference room, Cain confronted Peterson. "You told me those complaints wouldn't matter." Peterson removed his glasses. "I didn't know they had this much documentation." "You didn't know?" "Nobody did." Cain paced nervously. For the first time, he began considering the possibility of losing. Not just the lawsuit, everything: his career, his pension, his reputation, his future. Back in the courtroom, Sarah sat alone reviewing a folder. Maya had once asked her why accountability mattered so much. The answer was simple: every ignored act of misconduct became permission for the next one, and eventually someone paid the price. The clock above the courtroom door showed 1:47 p.m. Sarah closed the folder, her expression softened, not with satisfaction, with certainty. Everything was moving according to schedule. At exactly 1:58 p.m., her phone vibrated. One text message, 3 words. "We're downstairs now." Sarah read the message, then calmly placed the phone back inside her briefcase. Across the room, Marcus Cain noticed the movement. A strange feeling returned, the same feeling he had experienced all day. The sense that he was participating in a story whose ending everyone knew except him. The courtroom doors remained closed, but somewhere beyond them, footsteps were approaching, and within minutes, Marcus Cain would discover the truth about Sarah Washington. A truth that would change the balance of power forever. At exactly 2:00 p.m., the courtroom doors opened. Every conversation stopped, every head turned. Even the judge looked toward the entrance. A group of uniformed officials entered the room. At their center walked Police Commissioner Daniel Reynolds. His formal dress uniform immediately commanded attention. Behind him followed several senior city officials carrying leather portfolios and official documents. The atmosphere changed instantly. This was no ordinary courtroom interruption. Something significant was happening. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses. "Commissioner Reynolds, this is highly unusual." Reynolds nodded respectfully. "My apologies, Your Honor. However, the matter directly affects these proceedings." A ripple of confusion moved through the gallery. Reporters grabbed notebooks. Camera operators leaned forward. Marcus Cain felt his stomach tighten. The uneasiness he had experienced all day suddenly intensified. Commissioner Reynolds approached the front of the courtroom. "With the court's permission, I have an official announcement." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed." Reynolds opened a leather folder. The room became completely silent. Today, the city of Chicago officially completed a nationwide leadership search for its next chief of police. The statement drew immediate interest. Even jurors leaned forward. Sarah Washington remained seated, calm, composed, prepared. Reynolds continued. "After unanimous approval from the mayor's office, city council, and civilian oversight board, the position was awarded to an individual with exceptional experience in law enforcement, public policy, legal reform, and community leadership." Marcus Cain frowned. He still failed to understand what this had to do with the lawsuit. Then Sarah quietly stood. The movement seemed small. Yet somehow it captured every eye in the room. Commissioner Reynolds smiled. "It is my honor to officially recognize Sarah Elizabeth Washington as the new chief of police for the city of Chicago." The courtroom exploded with shock. Gasps echoed across the gallery. Jurors stared in disbelief. Several reporters nearly dropped their pens. Peterson's jaw literally fell open, but no reaction matched Marcus Cain's. The color drained from his face. For several seconds he simply stared, unable to process what he had heard, unable to understand what was happening. Sarah calmly removed her blazer. Underneath was a formal police dress uniform. Dark blue, perfectly tailored. decorated with commendations earned across 2 decades of service. The room watched in stunned silence. Everything suddenly made sense. Her legal knowledge, her understanding of police procedures, her confidence, her patience, her complete lack of fear. She had never been merely a plaintiff, she had been one of the most respected law enforcement leaders in America. Commissioner Reynolds continued. Chief Washington previously served as Deputy Commissioner, Special Investigations Commander, and Director of Police Accountability Initiatives. A massive screen displayed photographs. Sarah graduating from the police academy. Sarah receiving leadership awards. Sarah speaking before congressional reform committees. Sarah training future officers. The gallery watched in amazement. Marcus Cain felt the world tilting beneath him. Weeks earlier, he had assumed Sarah belonged at a welfare office. Now he was learning she would become the highest-ranking officer in his department. His new boss, his ultimate supervisor, the person now overseeing the very institution that employed him. Sarah stepped forward. The 3 stars on her uniform reflected the courtroom lights. "For the record," she said calmly, "my appointment became official this morning." Her voice carried authority without effort. She no longer sounded like a victim seeking justice. She sounded like a leader accustomed to responsibility. Judge Harrison leaned back slowly. "Chief Washington, this certainly provides additional context." "Yes, Your Honor." Across the room, Cain finally found his voice. "You planned this." Sarah turned toward him. There was no anger in her eyes, only disappointment. "No, Officer Cain." The title struck him harder than any accusation. Officer Cain, not Marcus, not defendant. Officer, a subordinate. "I planned a career dedicated to public service," Sarah continued. "You planned your own actions that morning." The words landed with devastating precision. No one could argue with them. No one tried. Commissioner Reynolds stepped forward again. "Chief Washington's first administrative review begins immediately following today's proceedings." Cain's hands started trembling. For the first time in 20 years, he understood something every victim of his behavior had already known. Power can disappear, authority can vanish, protection can end, and when it does, only your choices remain. Sarah checked her watch. 2:05 p.m., exactly on schedule. Then she opened a second leather folder. Unlike the lawsuit files, this folder carried an official departmental seal. Inside were documents nobody in the courtroom had yet seen. Documents that detailed not only Marcus Cain's misconduct, but the names of supervisors who had protected him. And as Sarah lifted the first page, several people in the gallery realized the lawsuit was no longer the biggest story in the room. The investigation was about to reach much higher. The courtroom remained silent as Sarah Washington opened the departmental folder. Moments earlier, the revelation of her appointment as Chicago's new chief of police had stunned everyone present. Now an entirely different tension filled the room. The lawsuit was no longer simply about one officer. It was becoming a window into an entire system. Sarah approached the evidence table. "Your Honor, the materials I am presenting were compiled during an independent leadership review conducted before my appointment." Judge Harrison nodded. "Proceed." Sarah placed several documents on the screen. Names appeared, internal emails, disciplinary recommendations, supervisor comments, records spanning nearly a decade. Marcus Cain felt his pulse accelerating. He recognized many of them immediately. Some had protected him, others had ignored complaints. A few had actively dismissed investigations. Sarah pointed toward the first email. This communication was written 4 years ago, after multiple discrimination complaints. The message appeared on the screen. Several jurors frowned. The language was disturbing. A supervisor acknowledged concerns. Another suggested avoiding formal action. A third recommended closing the matter quietly. The complaint disappeared. Nothing changed. Sarah displayed another document, then another, then another. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Complaints were not missing. They existed. Warnings were not absent. They existed. Recommendations were not overlooked. They existed. The problem was that nobody acted. Attorney Williams stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, Officer Cain's behavior survived because accountability repeatedly failed." Several members of the gallery nodded. The evidence no longer pointed toward individual misconduct. It pointed toward institutional negligence. Cain lowered his head. Years earlier, he had convinced himself his behavior was justified. Then he convinced himself it was normal. Eventually, he stopped questioning it altogether. Now he watched those choices return one by one. Sarah called the next witness, retired Deputy Chief Michael Bennett. The 70-year-old former commander approached the stand slowly. After taking the oath, he sat heavily. His expression revealed discomfort, not fear, regret. "Deputy Chief Bennett," Sarah began, "were you aware of complaints involving Officer Cain?" The older man closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." The answer echoed through the courtroom. "How many?" "More than I can accurately count." "Were investigations recommended?" "Yes." "Why were they not completed?" Bennett hesitated. Years of silence fought against a lifetime of conscience. Finally, he answered, "Because confronting the problem felt politically inconvenient." The statement landed like a hammer. Several reporters immediately began typing. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "Every department has people nobody wants to challenge. Cain generated complaints, but he also generated arrests and positive statistics. Leadership convinced itself results mattered more than conduct." The gallery grew restless. The truth sounded ugly, because it was. Bennett looked directly at the jury. "We failed." Nobody interrupted. "We saw warning signs and chose comfort over responsibility." For a moment, even Sarah appeared affected. The admission carried genuine remorse. Not excuses, not deflection, responsibility. The testimony continued throughout the afternoon. Additional records surfaced. Additional witnesses spoke. A troubling picture emerged. Marcus Cain had not created the culture, but he had benefited from it. And because he benefited from it, he helped preserve it. By 4 p.m., the jury had heard enough evidence to understand the larger story. This was never merely about a slap inside a courthouse. It was about assumptions, about prejudice, about systems that quietly tolerated behavior until someone finally refused to accept it. As proceedings neared adjournment, Judge Harrison addressed the room. "The evidence presented today raises serious concerns extending beyond this civil matter." Nobody disagreed. The judge announced the next morning would include final testimony before closing arguments. People slowly began gathering their belongings. Reporters rushed toward the exits. Jurors prepared to leave. Then Sarah stood once more. "Your Honor, before adjournment, I request permission to introduce one final witness tomorrow morning." The judge looked surprised. "Who is the witness?" Sarah closed the departmental folder. "Someone whose testimony has never previously been heard." "Can you be more specific?" A brief silence followed. Then Sarah nodded. "The first person who filed a formal complaint against Officer Cain nearly 18 years ago." Marcus Cain froze. His eyes widened. Memories flooded back. Faces, incidents, names he had long forgotten, or thought he had. The courtroom sensed the reaction immediately. Judge Harrison approved the request. "The witness may appear tomorrow." Sarah gathered her documents. Across the room, Cain sat motionless. For years, he believed old complaints disappeared. That time erased consequences. That forgotten people stayed forgotten. Now he was learning a different lesson. Sometimes the past waits patiently, and when it finally arrives, it brings receipts. The next morning arrived beneath a cold Chicago drizzle. Gray clouds covered the skyline as people gathered outside the federal courthouse long before proceedings began. News coverage had exploded overnight. What started as a civil rights lawsuit had become a national story. Reporters crowded the sidewalks. Community leaders arrived early. Even retired law enforcement officials filled seats inside the gallery. Everyone wanted to witness what happened next. Marcus Cain entered through a side entrance. For the first time in 20 years, he wore no confidence. His uniform suddenly felt heavier. His badge felt smaller. The previous day's revelations had shattered the image he spent decades building. Yet one question haunted him more than anything else. Who was the witness Sarah intended to call? At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Harrison entered. The courtroom stood. Proceedings began immediately. Sarah Washington sat quietly at the plaintiff's table. Her police uniform remained immaculate. 3 stars reflected beneath the courtroom lights. Unlike Cain, she appeared completely at peace. "Chief Washington," the judge said, You may call your witness. Sarah rose. The plaintiff calls Dr. James Mitchell. A tall African-American man in his 60s entered from the rear of the courtroom. Several jurors recognized him immediately. Others gasped. Marcus Cain felt his stomach drop. He remembered the name. Years ago, a courthouse incident, a complaint, one he assumed disappeared forever. Dr. Mitchell took the oath. His posture carried quiet dignity. Years of experience had given him a calm authority that needed no introduction. Sarah approached gently. Dr. Mitchell, would you please tell the court your profession? I am a federal judge. The room became even quieter. How long have you served? 23 years. Sarah nodded. Do you recall an encounter with Officer Marcus Cain 18 years ago? Mitchell looked toward Cain. His expression revealed neither anger nor hatred, only disappointment. Very clearly. Please describe what happened. The judge folded his hands. I was entering the courthouse where I worked. I presented identification. Officer Cain questioned whether it belonged to me. Several jurors frowned. What happened next? He accused me of using fraudulent credentials. Despite your position as a federal judge? Yes. The courtroom remained silent. Mitchell continued. He detained me in public for nearly 40 minutes while employees watched. Sarah allowed the words to settle. How did that experience affect you? For the first time, emotion appeared in Mitchell's voice. My son was with me that day. He was 12 years old. A painful silence followed. He asked me later why a man with a badge believed I was lying when everyone else knew who I was. Several jurors lowered their eyes. The impact of the story reached beyond the courtroom. It reached into families, into children, into generations. What did you tell him? Sarah asked. Mitchell took a deep breath. I told him some people see race before they see character. The statement lingered in the room. No attorney objected. No one moved. The truth spoke for itself. Sarah introduced the original complaint. Then another witness testified. A former federal prosecutor. Then a university professor. Then a military veteran. Each described remarkably similar treatment. Each had filed complaints. Each had been ignored. One by one, forgotten voices returned. By noon, the pattern was undeniable. Marcus Cain was no longer defending a single action. He was confronting 20 years of consequences. When testimony ended, Sarah approached the center of the courtroom. The judge looked toward both sides. Are there any additional witnesses? Peterson slowly stood. His face carried resignation. No, Your Honor. The defense had nothing left. No explanations, no alternative narratives, no missing context, only evidence. Judge Harrison nodded. Very well. We will proceed to closing arguments after lunch recess. The gallery buzzed quietly. Reporters rushed outside. Television analysts prepared updates. But Sarah remained seated. She looked through the courtroom windows toward the rainy skyline. For years, people had told victims to move on, to forget, to stay quiet. Yet here they were, 18 years later. The truth had finally found its audience. And after lunch, 12 jurors would decide whether accountability would finally catch up with Marcus Cain. The rain had stopped by the time the courtroom reconvened. Sunlight pushed through breaks in the clouds, casting pale beams across the federal building's tall windows. The atmosphere inside felt different now. The uncertainty was gone. Everyone understood the facts. What remained was judgment. 12 jurors would soon decide whether decades of misconduct finally carried consequences. Judge Harrison called the room to order. We will proceed with closing arguments. And Attorney Peterson stood first. His confidence from earlier proceedings had vanished. The evidence had left little room for maneuvering. Still, he had a duty to his client. He approached the jury carefully. Ladies and gentlemen, Officer Cain made mistakes, serious mistakes. Several jurors remained expressionless. But one terrible moment should not erase an entire career. Peterson paused. My client served this city for 20 years. He has a family, he has responsibilities. He has contributed to public safety. The words sounded reasonable, yet they felt incomplete, because everyone in the room knew the case was not about one moment. It was about patterns, choices, years of warnings ignored. Peterson continued, justice should correct behavior, not destroy lives. When he finished, He returned to his seat. The defense had done everything possible, but even Peterson appeared to understand the uphill battle ahead. Then Sarah Washington rose. The room became silent. She carried no notes, no prepared script, only a single visitor pass, the same one that had fallen to the floor weeks earlier. She stood before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice was calm, measured, steady. "When this trial began, some people believed it was about a slap." She held up the visitor pass. "It was never about a slap." Every eye followed her. "This card gave me permission to enter a courthouse." She looked toward the jurors, but Officer Cain decided my appearance mattered more than my credentials. A long silence followed. He looked at me and created a story before I spoke a single word. Sarah slowly lowered the card. "The problem is not that he made an incorrect assumption." Her voice grew firmer. "The problem is that he believed his assumptions justified his actions." Several jurors nodded. "Throughout this trial, you have heard from judges, attorneys, professors, veterans, and public servants." She gestured toward the witness stand. Different people, different backgrounds, different years. The same treatment. The words hung heavily in the room. Sarah continued, "Power is not dangerous because people possess it." She paused. "Power becomes dangerous when people stop questioning how they use it." Marcus Cain stared downward. He could no longer meet her eyes. Sarah's attention remained on the jury. "I became a police officer because I believed in service." Her voice softened. "Not authority, service. The badge was never supposed to create fear. It was supposed to create trust." A few people in the gallery quietly wiped away tears. Sarah's words felt less like an argument and more like a reflection on what public service should be. "This case is bigger than me. It is bigger than Officer Cain. It is about whether institutions deserve public trust." She looked toward the jurors one final time. "Trust is not given. It is earned. And when trust is broken, accountability is how we begin repairing it." The courtroom remained silent after she finished. No dramatic gestures, no raised voice. No theatrics, only truth. Judge Harrison instructed the jury. Then the 12 men and women disappeared into deliberations. Hours passed. The courthouse corridors filled with nervous energy. Reporters waited. Community members gathered. Television crews remained outside. Marcus Cain sat quietly in a conference room. For the first time in his adult life, he had nothing left to control. No authority, no badge, no narrative, only consequences waiting to arrive. Across the building, Sarah sat beside a large window overlooking downtown Chicago. She watched evening sunlight reflect from glass skyscrapers. Maya sat beside her. "Are you nervous?" her daughter asked. Sarah smiled softly. "No, why not?" Sarah looked toward the city skyline. "Because regardless of the verdict, the truth finally became visible." At that exact moment, a court officer entered the room. His expression was serious. "Chief Washington." Sarah stood. "The jury has reached a verdict." Throughout the courthouse, conversation stopped. People hurried toward the courtroom. Within minutes, every seat was occupied. Marcus Cain returned to the defense table. His hands trembled visibly. The jury filed back into the room, one by one, silent, focused. Final. The foreperson carried a sealed envelope. Judge Harrison accepted it, opened it, read the contents, then looked slowly across the courtroom. The expression on his face revealed nothing, absolutely nothing. And for one long breath, nobody knew whether Marcus Cain's 20-year career had just been saved or ended forever. The courtroom felt frozen in time. No one moved. No one spoke. The foreperson remained standing while Judge Harrison reviewed the verdict form. Outside, the late afternoon sun reflected off Chicago's skyline. Inside, 12 jurors held the future of Marcus Cain in their hands. Judge Harrison finally looked up. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied. Marcus Cain gripped the edge of the defense table. His breathing was shallow. His face was pale. For years he had watched defendants sit exactly where he now sat. He had never imagined becoming one of them. Judge Harrison nodded. "Please read the verdict." The foreperson unfolded the document. The sound of paper seemed unusually loud. "In the matter of Washington versus Cain, we find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts." A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Several spectators closed their eyes, others exchanged stunned looks. Reporters immediately began writing. The foreperson continued. We find that Officer Marcus Cain committed assault, violated the plaintiff's civil rights, and engaged in conduct inconsistent with the responsibilities of public service. The words struck with unmistakable finality. Marcus Cain stared ahead without expression. The verdict was not close. It was complete. The foreperson continued reading. We further find that evidence presented demonstrates a long-standing pattern of discriminatory conduct that caused measurable harm to members of the public and damaged trust in public institutions. Judge Harrison accepted the verdict form. The courtroom remained silent. Then he spoke. The court accepts the verdict. Years of assumptions, years of protection, years of ignored warnings. Gone. Just like that. Peterson lowered his head. Even he appeared relieved that the process had finally reached its conclusion. The evidence had been overwhelming. No legal strategy could overcome the truth. Judge Harrison turned toward Sarah. Chief Washington, would you like to address the court before sentencing recommendations are entered into the record? Sarah stood. The entire room focused on her. She looked toward the jury first. Thank you for your service and your attention to the facts. Then she turned toward the bench. Your Honor, I would like the record to reflect that this case was never motivated by revenge. The statement surprised many people, including Marcus Cain. Sarah continued, accountability and revenge are not the same thing. The distinction mattered. Revenge seeks suffering, accountability seeks correction. The room listened carefully. My goal has never been to destroy a man. My goal has been to expose a problem. Several jurors nodded. Sarah looked briefly toward Cain. For the first time, their eyes met. He expected anger. Instead, he saw sadness. Not sadness for herself, sadness for wasted opportunities, wasted years, wasted chances to become better. Judge Harrison entered recommendations supporting immediate decertification proceedings, administrative review, and referral for criminal investigation. The decisions were significant, but perhaps even more significant was what happened next. Marcus Cain slowly stood. The courtroom watched. For a moment, nobody knew what he intended to say. His voice trembled. Your Honor. He stopped, swallowed, tried again. I spent 20 years believing I knew people before they spoke. The admission shocked the room. Peterson looked up. Sarah remained still. Cain continued. I told myself I was protecting the public. His eyes lowered. Sometimes I was protecting my own prejudices instead. No one interrupted. No one objected. The words felt painfully honest. I don't expect forgiveness. His voice nearly broke. But I finally understand what everyone tried to tell me. The silence afterward carried enormous weight. For the first time, Marcus Cain sounded less like a defendant and more like a man confronting himself. Judge Harrison concluded the session. Court is adjourned until final orders are entered tomorrow morning. The gavel struck. People slowly stood. Conversations erupted across the room. Reporters rushed toward the exits. Television crews prepared breaking news coverage. But Sarah remained seated for a moment. She watched the courtroom empty. Maya approached quietly. You won, her daughter whispered. Sarah looked around the room, the witness stand, the jury box, the judge's bench, the place where truth finally emerged. Then she shook her head gently. No. Maya looked confused. Sarah smiled. The case isn't the victory. Then what is? Sarah glanced toward the courthouse doors. Outside waited cameras, community members, officers, leaders, an entire city watching. The victory, she said softly, is what happens next. As they walked toward the exit, neither of them noticed a message waiting on Sarah's phone. It had arrived moments earlier from City Hall. The subject line contained only 6 words. Federal Reform Partnership approved effective immediately. Sarah stopped walking, read the message once, then twice, because she realized something extraordinary. The verdict had not ended the story. It had just opened the door to changes far bigger than anyone in that courtroom yet understood. 1 week later, Chicago looked different. Not because its skyline had changed, not because its streets had changed, but because a conversation that had been avoided for decades was finally happening in public. Across television networks, city council meetings, police academies, and community centers, people were discussing accountability, trust, and leadership. The verdict in Washington versus Cain had become a symbol, not of punishment, of possibility. Inside City Hall, Sarah Washington stood before a packed auditorium. Representatives from federal agencies, community organizations, universities, and law enforcement departments filled every seat. The newly approved Federal Reform Partnership would provide funding, oversight, and training resources for cities seeking meaningful institutional change. Chicago had become the pilot program, and Sarah would lead it. The room quieted as she approached the podium. Behind her stood leaders from every corner of the city, people who rarely agreed on anything. Today they shared a common purpose. Sarah looked across the audience. She recognized victims of discrimination, veteran police officers, young recruits, parents, teachers, students, citizens, all waiting to hear what came next. A few weeks ago, she began, a courthouse incident became national news. A faint smile crossed her face, but this story was never about one courthouse. And the audience listened carefully. It was never about one officer. It was about choices. Sarah paused. Every institution becomes what it repeatedly tolerates. The statement echoed through the room. For too long, warning signs were ignored because confronting them felt uncomfortable. That ends now. Applause filled the auditorium. Sarah continued outlining reforms, independent oversight boards, transparent complaint systems, mandatory leadership accountability reviews, community engagement programs, bias prevention training, public reporting requirements. The changes were ambitious, but for the first time, they felt achievable. Meanwhile, Marcus Cain sat alone inside a federal detention facility awaiting final criminal proceedings. His days were quiet now. No badge, no authority, no special treatment, only time to think, time to remember, time to confront choices he had spent years avoiding. One afternoon, he received a newspaper. The front page featured Sarah speaking at the Reform Summit. The headline read, "Chicago launches National Accountability Initiative." Cain stared at the photograph. Months earlier, he had dismissed her without knowing her name. Now her leadership was influencing departments across the country. For a long moment, he simply looked at the image. Then he folded the newspaper carefully, not with anger, with understanding. Back in Chicago, Maya Washington watched her mother address another graduating police academy class. The recruits represented every background imaginable. Different races, different neighborhoods, different life experiences. Yet they stood together wearing the same uniform. Sarah walked slowly across the stage. "People will judge this profession by how you treat the person with the least power in the room," she told them. The recruits listened closely. "Character is not revealed when serving people who can help your career." Her voice carried through the auditorium. "Character is revealed when serving people who can offer you nothing in return." The audience rose in applause. Maya smiled. For years she had admired her mother's strength. Now she understood its source. Strength was not refusing to feel pain. Strength was refusing to let pain define your response. Months later, the city released its first reform report. Public trust ratings increased dramatically. Citizen complaints decreased. Recruitment improved. Community partnerships expanded. Progress remained imperfect, but it was real, and real progress always begins with honest accountability. One evening, Sarah returned to the courthouse where everything had started. The lobby looked exactly the same. Marble floors, security checkpoints, busy visitors, life moving forward. She stood quietly for a moment, not reliving the past, reflecting on it. A young woman approached carrying legal documents. "Excuse me," she said nervously. "Are you Chief Washington?" Sarah smiled. "Yes." The woman hesitated. "I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For proving that people like me belong here." Sarah looked around the courthouse, then back at the young woman. "You always belonged here." The woman smiled and walked toward the elevators. Sarah watched her go. Then she looked up at the American flag hanging above the lobby. Justice was never perfect. It never moved as quickly as people hoped. Sometimes it arrived late. Sometimes it arrived painfully. But when enough people refused to accept silence, change became possible, and that possibility was worth fighting for. Sarah turned and walked toward the exit. Outside, the Chicago skyline glowed beneath the setting sun. A new chapter had begun. Not just for her, for an entire community. For everyone who had ever been underestimated. For everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. And for everyone who chose courage instead of silence. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.